BlizzCon. This is one of my favorite panels of the day. These guys are going to talk about StarCraft 2 multiplayer. This is your StarCraft 2 multiplayer design team. We've got David Kim. That's right. We got David Sum, and we've got Aaron Kirkpatrick. These guys do so much work working on multiplayer for you guys, and they're going to try to give you all the information they possibly can about StarCraft 2 multiplayer and answer as many of your questions as they possibly can. All right, take it away, guys.
Okay, so before we talk about the specific changes that we have for Legacy of the Void, let's talk a little bit about the design goals that we have. First and most importantly, we want more action throughout the course of the game. But not only that, we also want to reduce passive parts of the game, such as the passive swarm host play. And we want more harassment options throughout the game so that we can create more action this way as well. And there are strategies in StarCraft that really provide the incentives for the players to go on the offense. And the Marine and Medevac strategy that you see above is one example of it. We want more things like these in the game so that people just want to go on the offense. And for example, in this case, because the Marines and Medevacs are so good with your army, but on top of that, the Medevacs can transport the Marines and they have high mobility, so players just can go on the offense with low risk. And we want to have more things like these in Legacy of the Void. And we want to have more micro opportunities on both sides. So this example is showing force field micro going up against burrow micro. And the reason for this is because engagements are just a lot more exciting to play and to watch if there's a lot going on in terms of micro. And we want more army versus army micro. So this is an example of Marines being split against Banelings who are also being split accordingly. And the main reason for this goal is because if two armies require a lot of micro, then it makes the game a lot more fun to watch. Because even if one of the armies is smaller, you can't really know who the winner would be, and it really depends on who micros better. And on the flip side, if both armies aren't micro-heavy and can be just A-moved, then you kind of know who the winner is even before the battle has begun. So it makes it less interesting to watch this game. There are strategies that really differentiate player skill. The Immortal Sentry push is one of them. The very best Protoss players in the world using this strategy, compared to an average pro-level player using it, we can clearly see the difference between these two players executing the exact same strategy. So we want more things like these in the game so that players can not only show off their skill better, but us as viewers can actually see who the better player is just by watching the game of StarCraft. And finally, we want to improve existing units and abilities. This includes units like the Corruptor or the Battlecruiser like you see above. And we want to really push every single unit in StarCraft 2 to its full potential within its respective roles.
So Legacy of the Void is still in a pre-alpha phase. So the things that you guys are going to see here today can still change. If you guys remember back to the Heart of the Swarm beta, we had Banelings that could move while burrowed. We had Oracles with the Entomb ability, which prevented your opponents from gathering resources. And of course, the mighty Warhound. So yeah, none of this stuff is final. As we go through the new content here today, we're also going to be letting you guys in on what our current design concerns are. And this is where you guys come in. Feedback starts today. You guys can let us know if you think these concerns are real or if you have ideas on how to make things better. Let's work together to make Legacy of the Void awesome.
To help achieve some of the goals that we've gone over, we've made two major changes to the way resourcing works in Legacy of the Void. First, we've reduced the number of minerals in each mineral patch and the amount of gas in each Vespene geyser. This means you're going to want to expand much faster than you did in Heart of the Swarm. With more bases spread across the map for each player, there are more points to attack, making aggression and harassment more rewarding in the mid to late game. The second change, we've increased the number of starting workers from 6 to 12. To compensate for this, we've also increased the supply granted by the Command Center, Nexus, and Hatchery. This goes back to our goal of reducing the number of passive moments in the game. The early game is always pretty slow to start up, and now with a stronger starting economy, players can start the action faster.
So let's talk about the specific changes that we have currently. Let's start off with the Terran first. So the first new unit on the Terran side is the HERC. This is a barracks unit that has high health, deals splash damage, and can use the grapple ability. What this ability allows the HERC to do is the HERC can attach itself to the target unit, allowing it to quickly move towards it. So let's check it out in action. So against Zerg, we'll see the first video of the HERC jumping into the Baneling line to focus fire them down to protect the Marines. So one way to counter the HERC from the Zerg side is to use units that deal full damage to the HERC that are not too small in size, such as roaches. And because HERCs don't attack air units are great counters to the HERC as well. Against Protoss, because HERCs have the light armored flag, they're great at tanking damage against high plus armored damage type units, such as Immortals. So Protoss units that counter the HERC from the ground are units such as Zealots or Archons, but both of these units are either melee range or short ranged, which makes positioning very important. So in the next video, you're going to see Zealots that are well spread against the HERCs that are intentionally staying back behind the lines to protect the Immortals. So we want the HERCs to counter the Zergling and Baneling strategy towards the later stages of the game, so that Zerg sometimes needs to transition into later tier units so that we can get more strategic diversity that way. So as part of this change, we've actually buffed the Ultralisk's armor so that they can counter the Terran bio army much harder. And as you'll see from the list of changes that we have for the Terran, you'll also notice that the late game options for Terran has been buffed as well. Against Protoss, we want the HERCs to really encourage Protoss army micro, like the last video that you just saw. And because HERCs can jump into core units of the Protoss army and splash them down, Protoss players will need to react accordingly by microing and splitting up your forces correctly in different engagements. The one concern that we have for the HERC is their overlap with the Hellbat. Because these two units both deal splash damage, both are high health, come online around the same time. This is an issue that we really need to deal with before or during the beta.
All right, let's talk about the Terran Cyclone. The Cyclone is a factory unit. It has fast movement speed and an active ability called Lock-On. You can use Lock-On to target an enemy, and then the Cyclone can deal high amounts of damage to it while moving. It attacks both air and ground, so it's a great addition to the mech composition. Let's see it in action. So the Cyclone will get countered by units with superior mobility. So let's see what happens when Stalkers with Blink go up against the Cyclone. Units that are slower than the Cyclone are pretty much going to get kited forever. So let's see that again, this time with a little trick from the Zerg player. So one of our big goals in Legacy of the Void is to create new units that have great gameplay from both sides. Since the Cyclone requires micro from both the attacking player as well as the defending, it leads to some really interesting fights. The Cyclone's also great at eliminating priority targets. And besides opening with Reaper or Hellions, Charons now have a new option in the Cyclone. The Cyclone's great at adding early pressure against your opponent in any matchup. We saw in our video earlier of the Cyclone being used against Protoss, but against the Zerg, you can snipe their queens, or you can snipe Terran bunkers as well. On the defense, the Cyclone is also great at stopping incoming drops and taking out harassment units like Oracles and Banshees.
As we mentioned earlier, one of our goals for Void is to make improvements to existing units. For the siege tank, medevacs can now pick up tanks even while they're in siege mode. This is limit 1 per medevac, similar to the THOR. And we really like this change because it allows the siege tank to go on the offense more and provides more micro potential for players using these strategies. In this video, you'll see a player using this new change to do some siege tank harassment, something you likely never would have seen before. For the THOR, we've removed the high-impact payload mode switch, which wasn't seeing a lot of play, and added a new self-repair ability. This heals the THOR up to full over time with a long cooldown. While it's active, the THOR can't move or attack, which creates some interesting strategic decisions in combat. In this video, you'll see a THOR using this ability to out-heal the damage from an enemy army. One concern we do have for this change is that out of combat, it's a pretty easy decision to just press the button and heal back up to full, and it doesn't require a lot of micro. So we'll be looking to improve this as we move forward into the beta. For the Banshee, we've added a new movement speed upgrade requiring the fusion core. This upgrade allows the Banshee to outrun mobile detectors like overseers and observers, which gives it some more effectiveness in the late game when normally Banshee harassment starts to wind down. We've also increased the base range of the Banshee by 1. This gives a little bit more room for microing, and it also improves the effectiveness of the Banshee when mixed in with your main army. Let's take a look at some Banshee harassment using these changes against the Zerg. That overseer will never catch up to them. So one potential issue we see with this change is the strength of Banshees in Terran versus Terran. It's already pretty good even before these changes, so we're worried it might push it a little bit too far. However, in our playtest so far, the Cyclone has proven to be an effective counter unit to early Banshee harassment. All the same, this is something we're going to keep an eye on as we move forward. The Battlecruiser has a new tactical jump ability. This allows the Battlecruiser to teleport to any point on the map, even without vision. However, it has an extremely high energy cost, so you have to be very careful when and where you jump to with your Battlecruisers, as you won't get another chance. If you do it right, it can be really effective. In the future, we'd also like to explore some changes that add more micro potential for the Battlecruiser, so that players have more opportunities to use their skill to shine while using this unit.
So next up is the Zerg. The first unit add in Legacy of the Void for the Zerg is the Lurker. So the Lurker is an improved version from what you're used to from Brood War. So it can do all the things that the Lurker could do back in Brood War, but it can also be upgraded to have siege range. So for those of you who haven't played Brood War before, the Lurker is a morph off of the Hydralisk, deals line splash damage, but needs to burrow to attack. So let's check it out in action. In the first video, you're going to see the lurker going up against a large number of smaller units, and in that scenario, the lurkers are very powerful. So one way to counter the lurker from the Terran side is to use the new Cyclone. Because the lurker has to be immobile when they attack, the Cyclone can counter lurkers very well. And let's check that out in action. And lurkers with their siege range upgrade can now outrange all base defenses in the game. And in the next video, I want to show a micro move that was possible in Brood War. You can also do this in StarCraft 2 if you're skilled enough. So currently, we really like the lurker, especially against the Protoss. And the reason for that is not only because the lurker can really encourage the Protoss armies to split up and have more micro, but also it allows Protoss to play very different strategically. So for example, internally, what we've seen is if the lurker count gets too high, the Protoss army can't really engage the Zerg army head-on. So what the Protoss has to do is, in some scenarios, they have to really split up their forces, attack from multiple fronts, or go for a more of a harassment-based game. And this type of strategic diversity that the lurker creates in this matchup is something that's really cool to us. In ZVZ, we want the lurker to counter the mass roach versus mass roach scenario. And because in that matchup, mass roach is a common strategy, we wanted a counter for that. And as you can guess, lurkers are pretty good against mass numbers of roaches.
This is the Zerg Ravager. The Ravager is a morph off the Roach. It has an ability called Corrosive Bile. Corrosive Bile targets a location, and then after a brief delay, the Ravager will launch an attack that will deal damage to both air and ground. One of the unique features of this ability is that it can be used to break force fields. Internally, we've tried ways for Zerg to break force fields using Banelings or massive units on Tier 1, but because they countered force fields so heavily, it ended up just removing force fields from that matchup entirely. And this wasn't what we wanted. So the Ravager's ability adds an interesting way to do that because it involves micro from both players. So let's see how that works. As you can probably guess, this ability is great against things that don't move. Defensive structures, for example, but also units like lurkers and siege tanks. So what about units that can move? Well, they just move. So what you didn't see in that video, the Ravager can actually try to lead its shot against moving targets, and if you can anticipate where the enemy's army is going to be, you can deal damage to them that way. We've actually been having a lot of fun with this ability in our internal playtests. As I mentioned earlier, this ability does also hit air units. So things we like about the Ravager. It adds micro on both sides, but it also adds some positional gameplay as well. Using the ability, you can deny areas or get the enemy to move. The Ravager also gives us the interaction with force fields that we've been looking for. However, there is one concern. As we mentioned earlier, we liked that the Lurker was breaking up the mass roach battles in ZVZ. Well, if the Ravager counters the Lurker a little too hard, then it might become an issue again. So we'll keep an eye on this going forward.
For corruptor changes, we've removed the corruption ability and added caustic spray. Caustic spray channels on a ground unit, dealing slowly increasing damage over time. While the corruptor's channeling, it can't move, and if the target moves out of range, the ability is cancelled. This means that it's not that great against the enemy army. However, it's quite effective at picking off undefended buildings or slower moving units, giving it a lot more harassment utility when there are no enemies in the air to fight. Let's take a look at this against a Protoss base. One concern we do have for this is that with corruption removed, the corruptor's anti-air damage might be a little bit too low, and we'll be ready to make balance tweaks if that turns out to be the case. We've made big changes to the swarm host. Its role has been changed to a mobile harassment unit. The first change is that spawn locust can now be used while the swarm host is unburrowed. This allows the swarm host to stay mobile while it's attacking. The second change is the cooldown of spawn locust has been increased, but the strength of locust has been increased with it. This gives significant windows for the opponent to counterattack in when there are no locusts up on the map. What this means is that you're not going to want to sit back passively relying on your swarm host to defend your front line. You're going to want to be active with this unit. With the increased cooldown, it's now an important decision when and where each wave of locusts is spawned. As such, spawn locusts can no longer be auto-cast. You'll have to manually send each wave of locusts to attack. And last, there's a new upgrade for swarm hosts that allows locusts to fly. Now, they can't attack while flying, but they can swoop down to the ground to engage the enemy's forces. Let's take a look at these new flying locusts. While we were looking into Zerg's harassment options, we realized we wanted to add more opportunities to use Zerg's unique drop mechanic, the Nidus Worm. To do this, Nidus Worms can no longer be damaged until they've finished unburrowing and are about ready to deploy units. This means that it's going to take an appropriate amount of army to respond to this threat. Another part of this that we're really excited about is the late game potential for strategies. Zerg players traditionally have had a tough time cracking the defenses of turtling players in the late game, even with a big economic advantage. Now they can use that economic advantage to spawn multiple Nidus Worms, peeling apart the defenses of a passive player.
So now let's take a look at the changes on the Protoss side. So before we talk about the specific unit changes, I want to talk a little bit about warping. So we've been exploring different changes to try to make warping in units from the warp gates more strategic, more positional, and involves more micro. And the two changes that we have today are warping in units take extra 200% damage, and they also take longer to finish warping in. So what we're seeing from this is on the offense, when a Protoss player goes to attack the other player using an offensive pylon with warp gates, the defending player, even if he has a smaller army, he can actually try to go around and try to snipe the warping in units. And what this means for the Protoss player is now the Protoss player has to decide if he's going to retreat his whole army back to his pylon every time he warps in units, or if he's going to continue attacking and have those new units be at a risk. So we like this type of strategic and positional decisions that really are required on both sides due to these two changes. And on the defense, we were initially a little worried because it is a nerf, but at the same time, on the strategy side, we think this is a cool change as well. So for example, in the current game of StarCraft 2, if some Zerglings run into your probe line, all the Protoss player really needs to do is warp in some Zealots right on top of the Zerglings. So there's not a lot of decision involved. Whereas now, when and where to warp in your defensive units is really critical. So we like this change strategically. But because this is such a big change, this will have to be something that we really have to tune and play test during the beta.
All right, let's talk about the Protoss Disruptor. The Disruptor warps in from the robotics facility. It doesn't have an attack, but it has a very powerful ability called Purification Nova. When you activate Purification Nova, the Disruptor will become invulnerable, it moves faster, and it can pass through units. When the effect ends, it'll deal massive burst damage. So let's see what this looks like. So once the Disruptor deals its damage, it's going to be extremely vulnerable while the ability is on cooldown. So let's see what happens when the Disruptor goes up against units that can survive the Purification Nova. The unit is fairly expensive, so you don't want to just lose them like that. Let's see how they do against Terran. That is a lot of damage. But one thing about this ability is that it doesn't hit air units. So let's see one of the ways that the Terran can respond. So you didn't see it in this video, but another way that the Terran can respond is just by splitting his units to mitigate a lot of that incoming damage. So the Disruptor. The theme of the day has been micro on both sides. The Disruptor is probably one of the best examples of this, as it requires a lot of skill and anticipation for you to use it, as well as giving the defender an opportunity to micro to mitigate damage. The Disruptor gives the Protoss player an opportunity to gain some big advantages using micro and strategy. This is true on both the Army case as well as the harassment case, especially when paired with a War Prism. If you can drop this guy in a worker line or catch the enemy army off guard, you're going to deal that massive damage we saw. One of our concerns, however, is that there is some overlap with the Colossus being a robotic splash option. The game is more fun when there are interesting choices to make in different situations. So we want to make sure that each of these units has its own role. And in going along these lines, we've been looking at some tuning options on the Colossus to make sure that it's still a better option versus some units like Zerglings or Zealots.
There are quite a few modified units in Void for Protoss, so let's jump right in with the Warp Prism. The Warp Prism can now pick up units from a distance. This is a really powerful tool in extending the lifetime of drop harassment, as you can pick up units that are about to be caught by enemy defenders and redeploy them elsewhere. It's also a really nice addition to the core Protoss army, as it can use this ranged pickup to rescue units that are in danger from enemy forces, like you can see here. For the Immortal, we've removed the Hardened Shield's passive ability and added a new active ability called Barrier. Barrier absorbs a lot of damage, but only for a short period of time. So if you use it at the wrong moment, it'll be wasted. But let's take a step back. Why did we remove the Hardened Shield's passive? Well, it was a little effective in most situations, but it was a really hard counter to the Terran siege tank, which limited their options in this matchup. Barrier is really effective in a variety of different situations and adds a lot of micro on both sides of an engagement. Let's take a look at the Immortal using Barrier to win a fight which previously it would have lost. Now, as I mentioned before, this adds a lot of micro on both sides of the engagement. In that video, the Zerg player could have focus fired his Hydralisks on the Immortals without Barrier active to get more of an even footing in the fight. With that said, we are concerned that this ability might be a little bit too strong in certain timing attacks or all-ins using the Immortals, so that's something we're going to keep an eye on as we move into the beta. We've made a couple changes to the Oracle. First, its revelation ability now detects units in addition to granting vision of them. As such, the old detection ability in vision has been removed. It functioned pretty similarly to an observer, and we wanted to try a more unique way of detecting for Stargate strategies that has its own strengths and weaknesses. Revelation is actually really good at dealing with really mobile cloaked units like the BANSHEE. We've also added a new ability to the Oracle called Stasis Ward. Stasis Ward places a cloak trap down on the ground, which triggers when enemy ground units move nearby. These units are placed in stasis where they can't move, attack, or use abilities, but are also invulnerable. This is really strong against clumped up enemy armies, as it can take a giant chunk of their army out of commission and leave the rest of it vulnerable. This means that when you're going up against this, you're going to want to keep your army spread out as you move across the map. We've made some tweaks to the Tempest to make it function as more of a skirmishing unit. To do this, it now has a faster movement speed, but it can no longer attack air. This means you're going to have to use other units to support the Tempest when you're engaging enemy air threats. Or you can use that increased movement speed to retreat back to a safer location, which gives some of that skirmishing gameplay that we're looking for. We've also added a new ability to the Tempest called Disintegration. This is pretty short range, and it deals a lot of damage over a long period of time. It'll outright kill most units, but while their health is slowly ticking down, they can still fight back, so you'll have to be ready for them to counterattack. And finally, the carrier. The carrier has a new release interceptors ability. This makes all of the interceptors permanently leave the carrier and move to a target location which they'll defend for a few minutes. At this point, the carrier can begin rebuilding its interceptor count, it can retreat back to a safe location, or it can stay there and help and engage in the fight with the interceptors. In this video, you'll see a carrier using this ability to perform a flyby attack on an enemy base. There are a lot of things that you can do with this ability. You can use it to reinforce a main engagement, you can harass or defend. We think there's a lot of possibilities, and we're really excited to see what players do with it.
So besides all the new units and all the unit changes that we just discussed, we also have some major features coming with Legacy of the Void. The first is automated tournaments. So automated tournaments are tournaments that you sign up for on Battle.net and you play over Battle.net on that same day. So for example, when you log on to Battle.net and there's a tournament going on at a certain time, you can choose to sign up for that tournament and finish out playing that tournament on that same day. And the main design goal for automated tournaments is to really capture the StarCraft 2 tournament experience. And what I mean by that is you'll be able to do things that you can't on the ladder, such as know who you're playing next, prepare for his strategies, or maybe even veto maps per round, depending on what race you're playing against. And I think most importantly, all StarCraft 2 tournaments these days are group stage into bracket play, and we want to do that for automated tournaments as well. So you'll play in the group stage, where 2 of the 4 players in your group move up to the bracket play, where you can finish out playing that tournament. And one concern for automated tournaments for us is the total duration of the tournaments. And the reason for that is because we want to finish on that same day. So we're currently thinking maybe 3 to 4 hours is a good total duration. And what this means is we may have to do things like maybe we only have 1 group stage instead of 2, or maybe we have best of 1 matches instead of best of 3 in various rounds.
Another new feature we have coming is ARCHON mode. ARCHON mode is a new team game experience. So imagine playing a 1v1, but where a friend can help you control your units and your base. Internally, we've done things like have one player play and do all the macro while their partners do all the micro. But actually what we found was helping each other throughout the entire game has been a much more effective way to play. For example, I played a game with Aaron where during a main engagement, I would take control of only the High Templar and make sure I hit those perfect Psy Storms while he controlled the rest of the army. Or in a different game, Davey was defending our base from an attack, and I grabbed 2 Cloaked Banshees and attacked 2 separate locations at once, and I was able to do a ton of counter damage. So with a little teamwork and some good coordination, I think there's going to be a ton of things that you guys can do in this mode. Another great thing about this mode is it's really great for playing with a teammate with different skill level than yours. You can have a lot of fun that way. Or if you're playing with a friend who's maybe new to StarCraft, you can jump into that game and teach them how to play that way. Whether you use this for casual or hardcore, it's going to be a ton of fun. And it's playable here today at BlizzCon on the show floor, so make sure to check it out and let us know what you think.
So we'll be preparing to get into beta in the first half of next year. And what this means is for those of you who are here today, please check out the playtest machines that we have set up, play with these changes, and give us feedback. And for those of you who are just tuning in on the streams, we have a lot of additional information available on YouTube and our website. So please check those out and give us feedback that way. We really believe the development of StarCraft 2 is a group effort between us and you guys. So please help us out to make the beta experience really great, as well as the live game of Legacy of the Void. So before we move on to the question section of this panel, we're going to be showing you a cool video of all the things that we talked about. So if you guys would start lining up for questions, we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Zeke, and I'm a huge fan of StarCraft. I've been following StarCraft since the original and through Heart of the Swarm. And you introduced a cool feature in Heart of the Swarm, which was the skins and little dance stuff that you unlock. And it adds a nice little kind of sense of individuality and personality. And I was curious if you guys were planning to continue adding more skins and more ways to diversify and make your army your own army.
Yeah, that's something that we discuss a lot internally, and we definitely want to, but I think the main consideration there is the performance issues, because StarCraft is a game where you have so many different units in the game, and not necessarily for 1v1, but in a game of 4v4, if all the different players are using all completely different skins, it might have some performance issues, but that's something that we're discussing internally, and it's something that we want to do if the engine allows for it.
Hi, I had a question about some of the new Legacy of the Void units. I played a good amount of Legacy of the Void here, and I'm a semi-professional player. And I think that some of the units might possibly be broken. Like, for example, the Battlecruiser, I feel like it's extremely good, but also in the same time would encourage aggressive strategies.
Yeah, so the balance of these new units is still definitely a work in progress. We always try and push for things to be as powerful as possible so that people are more encouraged to try it out, figure out what's good and bad about it, and also because we just generally want our units to feel powerful. and only pull back when balance means we have to. So balance is something we'll be really focusing on as we move through the beta, and I'm not too surprised if you find things to be a little bit crazy right now.
Hello, I have a simple question. Is there going to be a ranked ladder for ARCHON mode?
Yeah, we definitely want to include that in the ladder. We think it can be a very competitive mode. So find a good partner and start practicing for it.
Hey, so I know that a lot of you guys have actually mentioned things about clan team wars on Battle.net through automated systems, so you can set up, I don't know, 4 or 5 of your friends to play a series of 1v1s as a team, but in separate matches. Is there still interest in that?
Yeah, we definitely want to, we definitely think that's a good idea, but I think the first focus is getting the automated tournaments down first. So we'll try to get the initial version of automated tournaments working sometime during the beta and play test that one. And then once we've figured out the answers for that system, I think we can add on to that system. And what that would be, I'm not sure, but we'll see when we get there.
Hi, so the worker saturation, when you're on 3 base, it's about 66. So you're gonna start with 12. Are you guys gonna cut down patches? Are you gonna, because right now the optimal is 16, but that's a lot of workers if you go to 4 or 5 bases. So are you willing to cut down to 7, 6, maybe make it less than 16 and keep 8 patches?
So I've heard that there's misconception online that the income rate has been changed or the max worker count has been changed, but that's not true. The income rate is the same, and the max, most efficient, some people, a lot of players say it's 16, but then the max is still 24. The income rate hasn't changed. The only change is the total amount of resources on both the minerals and the geysers have been reduced. So the goal here is we want to not completely change how the resourcing works, but we want to really focus on the, making the game more active and reduce some of the passive play through this change. So what we're noticing is players really need to expand quicker, so there's just more avenues to attack and so on.
Hey guys, I just want to first thank you for being able to take risks with this. I love the resource change, it's amazing. I've been playing StarCraft since Brood War came out, and in Brood War, like everyone knows, fights were very spread out and took a long time. And in StarCraft 2, we have a lot of people responded with the fact that fights are very fast and we have a lot of really high DPS units like the Hydralisk and everything. I was just wondering if you guys would consider maybe trying out across-the-board damage nerfs, maybe to extend the lengths of battles and make the game a little more, giving you a little more time to micro and stuff like that.
So that is something that we're still looking into. I don't know exactly what that would be in terms of whether it's adjustments to damage or something else, but we are keeping that in mind. But at the same time, we don't think it's necessarily bad if fights end quickly, so long as the game doesn't just come down to one big fight. So long as there's a lot of action throughout the entire game, we think we've hit a point that we're pretty happy with.
Hi, so I have a question about the Protoss. I know that they only have one new unit and it's their expansion. And I was wondering if there's anything in the works for a new Protoss unit or some more Protoss ideas. That's it.
Hi, Alex. So currently what we're showing here today is just a snapshot. So we're still in progress of testing a bunch of other new units for all the races. So we had some other Protoss units that we're looking at, but they just weren't ready to show here today. But we're definitely still working on things. So like I said, this is a pre-alpha phase. So also, if you guys got suggestions for things, please send it in.
All right, so first off, love the game. It's great. My only question is during the Archon mode, the army select, if your ally has it selected and you want to micro with some of the units in the army, how would you counter that and they keep trying to move the whole army and you're only trying to work with like 3 or 4 Zerglings? How would that work?
Yeah, so right now we've been kind of relying on just some practice, maybe a conversation beforehand, like when I set these units and when I rally them here, they're for you, or just kind of working out a strategy ahead of time really helps. We're still looking into maybe some UI improvements as well. If you guys have feedback on maybe like how to better show what your ally is controlling, that would also help. But yeah, you got to make sure if your partner likes to use that select army button, that you guys got to talk about that.
We've actually had moments where these two guys were kind of arguing back and forth because one of them used the army, select all army button, which I thought was kind of funny. But
actually, another time when I was playing with Aaron, we were saying like, oh, dude, I had some sick micro on that fungal growth. He was like, wait, I thought I did that. So we're both trying to take credit for those awesome fungals.
Hi, I think it's really cool how you're pushing towards more army micro. My question relates to, it'd be interesting if you would consider a mode between 1A and Pro Micro. I mean, for example, everyone knows you should split your Marines when the banelings are coming in. Now, some of us aren't ever going to be Pro, so it'd be interesting maybe if there's like a button which makes all your Marines kind of scatter or something like that. It might be less just frustrating.
yeah, so that area is like we want to make the game as hardcore as possible for the pros, but at the same time we wanted to make it accessible for normal players. So that's something that we struggle a lot with. So it's something that we'll have to continue working on as we go forward. But we are discussing things like making the game a little bit easier for the normal players, but harder for pros. So such as, what if the Cyclone ability was autocast? Then normal players will be able to play a little easier using that unit, whereas pros will need to still turn that off and then focus on the specific units that they want to target. So these are the things that we're discussing. But because this is such an important area of the game that we don't have a super clear solution for yet, any suggestions here will be greatly welcome. And I think ultimately, if we can find a solution that kind of caters to both of these very different crowds, I think that'd be the best for StarCraft 2.
Yeah, so while we're looking at those changes, I'm also going to keep talking about how awesome Archon mode is. Even internally, when we were testing out some of the really micro-focused battles, we've had like 2 players kind of do that at once. So if you guys are struggling with some of your APM, like you should definitely check out Archon mode, because you're going to feel like you're a pro when you're just, get to combine your APMs for that epic battle.
Hi, I'm a noob Zerg player, so like spreading creep is always a big challenge. And I know that like one tumor spreads slowly. Is there going to be any change to that?
We haven't talked about any improvements to making creep easier to spread. It's something that we can discuss, but we do think that it's kind of a fine balance in terms of being able to spread quickly versus being able to remove it. We have played with some tweaks to making it a bit more back and forth, but we ultimately pulled that back a bit as we decided that it feels pretty good where it is right now, but that's something we'll definitely keep in mind.
And I think everything in StarCraft is, you just can't do everything unless you're like the very best pro in the world. So I think if, say, I'm a player that I can't really spread creep all that efficiently, like the pros, then I'm probably playing against other players who aren't doing some stuff not as optimal as the highest levels of the level players of the game. So I think in some ways the matchmaker kind of handles some of that too.
Hi, by the way, thank you for making a great series. I've been playing since StarCraft 1. It's awesome. Just wanted to know if you're going to be implementing a lever system like Heroes of the Storm. As an amateur player, it's tough to get a group together, and it's really a bummer when you get some group and then next thing you know, 2 of them just leave and you're out of luck.
That isn't something that we've really looked into. We sort of take the other approach, which is to try and make the games pretty quick, try and make sure that they don't drag on too long. And we also think that it can be pretty fun if you find a person that you're going to play with regularly and get used to playing with them and form strategies. So That's been our focus right now, but again, that's something that we could take a look at.
Hi, you keep saying that this is the final chapter of StarCraft and then that's going to tie up everything with Legacy of the Void. What's the future after with multiplayer of StarCraft?
So that's something that we're discussing, and especially on the multiplayer side, it's not really the end. Even if Legacy of the Void is released, we're going to continue to support the game, and we're going to continue making balance tweaks, do map adds, and maybe even unit changes if necessary. So on the multiplayer side, I think this is a game that will last for much longer than even after the last expansion has been released. Yeah.
Yeah, so when we say conclusion, we're really talking about the story. Like, you want to see what happens to Kerrigan and Raynor and Artanis. So this is the conclusion of their story. It's definitely not the end of StarCraft.
Hi, for Archon mode, would you be interested in implementing like a mechanic saying like give one player more priority to say like if both players have selection over a certain unit, like the person who has priority will actually have control of it. His commands will take priority over the other person's.
It's an interesting suggestion. We can probably look into that and see if that works out. Thank you.
Hello, my question is, did you ever think of a ladder retro mode where you do Brood War tech and units only, but in StarCraft 2's far better control and AI and graphics, and also do that with Wings of Liberty and Heart of the Swarm?
So we talked about having ladders for different mods, such as Brood War mode or popular mods out there, things like that. We haven't really decided on a specific thing yet, but as far as different modes of StarCraft is concerned, we thought it might be best to just focus on the one StarCraft 2 current game, more so than giving players too many options to play. Because one downside, I think, of this could be that the matchmaker is split between the various different versions of StarCraft. So we thought it's a better player experience if all the players are kind of focused on the one game of StarCraft 2. But having a ladder for arcade maps, things like that, are something that we are discussing internally.
Hi. So one thing that's sort of been discussed by the hardcore community, basically since the Wings of Liberty beta, has been the way area units control this thing called the moving shot, where when you fire and change direction at the same, you change direction as you fire, allowing area units to dance, as they called it in Brood War. And basically, every time like a new expansion or big changes come out, about 3 months later, people start talking about moving shot again and discussing like how much it would benefit StarCraft 2. Has that reached the development discussions? Have people tested this internally? Just because people keep bringing it up, and I guess they keep coming back to it for a reason.
Yeah, that is something that we've looked at, and we've definitely received that feedback. What we've found is that some of the changes that make units behave the way that they did in Brood War aren't necessarily great for StarCraft 2. They can make it so that the game can be a little bit hard to read as a player and a spectator. Like, for example, air separation can make it so that units stack up really tightly and you can't tell how many units your opponent has, things like that. Instead, we focused more on finding our own ways to add more micro and more control opportunities for players so that we still get a lot of that cool micro gameplay, but not necessarily through the exact same method.
And as far as moving shot is concerned, we actually have it in StarCraft 2, so you can see it in units like the Banshee. But we've seen less of it these days, is why we're trying out the +1 range change to get that back. But it's not the same as Brood War. The Brood War one was, if you're good enough, then you can actually not have the unit actually never stop while firing. But we do also have that in units such as the Phoenix. So we kind of like having this diversity of some units really required to micro to the best of the player's potential versus some units are a little easier, but you still get that completely moving while firing effect. So we want that type of diversity throughout the game.
just to add one more thing onto that, as we mentioned before, one of our goals is to differentiate player skill. And so we also want to make sure that when we have these cool micro opportunities, it's something that you can recognize and say, oh, that was a really cool move he did right there. So that's one of our focuses in saying, well, can you actually tell that he did something cool?
Hey guys, I'm Joe. This is not so much StarCraft multiplayer, but more like just StarCraft. Can you guys put a suggestion in to make a StarCraft movie?
I think that'd be awesome too, but I think whoever's making the Warcraft movie are pretty busy with that. So maybe after that, maybe we can start giving them suggestions, like both you guys and us, so that if more people say it, then it might happen.
All 4 of us can make this happen.
Starring David Kim in a distant future.
Hi guys, I'm Tibbs. Question for you. If you had a chance to battle against your favorite president, who would you want to battle?
MC, the Protoss president?
No, as in President of the United States.
I think I'd go with Abe Lincoln, the great emancipator. Yeah. He's scrappy.
Polk. You say Polk? Yeah, I'm not really sure because I don't know how much practice all the presidents have with StarCraft 2, so I don't know if the game will be all that amazing to play.
Hi, I was wondering, are there going to be any rewards for automated tournaments?
Yeah, that's something that we definitely have planned. We don't know what they are yet, but we are discussing things like badges, tournament badges that you can collect, or tournament-specific portraits that you can earn, things like that. And maybe we can do more on this side too, but initially we're focusing on the tournament itself first, and then we'll discuss the rewards more in detail after that.
Hi, so Protoss doesn't get a lot of love for the early mid-game with all the changes that everyone has. One example come to mind is the CYCLONE. The only counter is either hair or blink, and you know, that's not quick compared to a factory. So do you have any ideas to fix that with another unit? And yeah.
Yeah, we've actually been trying early game Protoss units. So one example is we had this unit that you build from the Nexus, and the goal of it was to create a lot of early game action. So what this unit did was it was a flying unit, but it couldn't attack from the air, and you had to come down to attack. So you build these units, you go and start harassing without having to worry about choke points, things like that. And what we kind of noticed is it feels kind of like the Reaper early game. So we wanted to look for something else that functions a little differently compared to that unit. But this is an area that we do want to have something for, if we can. So any feedback here will be great.
Thank you.
This will be our last question.
Hi, I play a lot of custom games with my friends, but some of the colors you can choose for your army are limited to only the really large maps. And I was wondering, maybe we could open up the color selection for your armies to the smaller maps too? Or maybe even when you put the mode on to only see one color for your army and the enemy army, maybe you can choose what color that always is.
Yeah, that's a pretty good suggestion. We'll make sure that our UI team hears about that. That sounds like something that we could do. Thanks.
So thank you so much for coming out to the multiplayer panel, and have a great BlizzCon, everyone.